Imagine for a moment that you are standing in the middle of a vast marketplace. Stalls stretch endlessly in every direction, each one overflowing with shimmering goods, gadgets that promise efficiency, clothes that whisper of status, foods engineered to addict, and experiences packaged as escapes from the very world they keep you tethered to. The air hums with the low, seductive chant of advertisements, a chorus that never sleeps, reinforcing the unspoken creed: you are what you own, and happiness is just one more purchase away. This is the modern matrix, not a dystopian sci-fi fantasy, but the meticulously constructed illusion of consumerism, a system so pervasive that it shapes our desires before we even recognize them as our own. Alan Watts, the philosopher who danced on the edges of Eastern mysticism and Western pragmatism, saw through this illusion with piercing clarity. He understood that consumerism is not merely an economic system but a metaphysical trap, a hall of mirrors that distorts our deepest yearnings into cravings for things that can never truly satisfy. To speak of escaping the matrix is not to advocate for some ascetic rejection of the material world, nor is it a call to retreat into esoteric detachment. It is an invitation to see the strings, to recognize how consumerism functions as a kind of hypnosis, convincing us that meaning is external, that fulfillment is a commodity, and that the self is a project to be perfected through accumulation. Watts, with his signature blend of wit and wisdom, reminds us that this is the oldest trick in the book, the illusion that happiness lies out there, in the next acquisition, the next upgrade, the next milestone of fabricated success. But what if the real rebellion is not in rejecting the world, but in reclaiming our perception of it? What if the most radical act is to step outside the frantic chase for more and realize that we were never lacking to begin with? This is the heart of Watts' message, a call to awaken from the collective dream of consumerism and rediscover the richness of simply being. The matrix is not a prison of walls and bars, but of conditioned thoughts, of borrowed desires, of a life measured in transactions rather than transformations. And so, escaping this matrix begins with a shift in seeing. It is not about renouncing all possessions, but about recognizing when possessions possess us. It is about disentangling worth from wealth, joy from consumption, and identity from the endless performance of buying and displaying. Watts often spoke of life as a musical composition, not a race to the final note, but a dance to be savored in each unfolding moment. Consumerism, in contrast, turns life into a ledger, a tally of gains and losses, forever deferring contentment to some future purchase, some future achievement. Yet the path to liberation is not found in some distant, enlightened realm. It is here, in the ordinary magic of the present. It is in the pause before the impulse buy, in the question, do I truly need this, or have I been taught to want it? It is in the rediscovery that the most profound joys, friendship, creativity, the quiet awe of existence, are not for sale. The matrix thrives on our forgetfulness. Resistance begins with remembrance. This exploration is not just philosophical musing. It is a survival guide for the soul in an age of engineered dissatisfaction. We will journey through the core illusions that consumerism sustains, the deeper symbolic truths that Watts unveiled, and the practical ways we can step out of the trance, not as isolated rebels, but as quiet revolutionaries rewiring the dream from within. The marketplace will always beckon, its siren song of more a constant whisper in our ears. But beyond its noise, there is another voice, one that speaks in the language of enough, of presence, of the unshakable knowing that the real treasure was never in the buying, but in the being. Beneath the glittering surface of advertisements and the endless scroll of curated desire lies a machinery so pervasive that we mistake its hum for the sound of our own thoughts. Alan Watts, with the precision of a poet and the clarity of a sage, peeled back the layers of this illusion to reveal a startling truth. Consumerism is not merely an economic system but a metaphysical sleight of hand, a conjurer's trick that turns longing into a perpetual motion machine. To understand its grip, we must trace the invisible architecture of its myths, the way they shape not just what we buy but who we believe ourselves to be. The first and most potent myth is the doctrine of insufficiency, the whispered suggestion that we are unfinished, that our lives lack some essential ingredient only commerce can provide. This is the seed from which the entire garden of consumerism grows. From childhood, we are taught to see ourselves as projects in need of upgrades, our worth measured in labels and logos, our happiness deferred until the next purchase. Watts dismantled this illusion with a simple yet radical proposition. What if the ache for more is not a reflection of our lack but a symptom of our forgetfulness? In Taoist thought, which Watts often invoked, the universe is already complete. And so are we. The pursuit of external validation, then, becomes a kind of self-imposed exile, a wandering in search of a home we never left. Consumerism thrives on this amnesia, offering salvation in the form of products that promise to fill a void they themselves created. Closely tied to this is the theater of choice, a stage play where we are cast as free agents selecting from an endless array of options. Yet how free are we when our desires are meticulously engineered, when trends are manufactured and obsolescence is built into the design? What's likened this to a man choosing between 50 brands of toothpaste, convinced he is exercising liberty while unaware that the real choice, whether to play the game at all, never appears on the shelf. The system's genius lies in its ability to make its walls invisible, to frame the menu as the world. True freedom, what's suggested, begins when we step outside the curated options and ask the dangerous question: who decided these were the only choices? Time, too, is colonized by this machinery. In the consumerist paradigm, time is no longer the river in which we swim but a resource to be mined, a currency to be spent. We trade hours for wages, wages for goods, goods for fleeting hits of dopamine, a cycle that leaves us richer in things but poorer in presence. Watts often spoke of the Western obsession with the future, the way we sacrifice the aliveness of now for a hypothetical later. We are living in a world where the means have become the ends, he observed, where we work to live and live to work, and in the meantime, life slips by like scenery outside a train window. Consumerism depends on this deferral, on convincing us that fulfillment is always just over the next horizon, in the next purchase, the next promotion, the next life stage. Yet woven through Watts' work is a quiet rebellion, a way out of the labyrinth. It is not the rejection of materiality but the reclamation of sovereignty, the shift from being a consumer to being a creator of meaning. This begins with the radical act of enoughness, the realization that no product can bestow what we already possess, the capacity to be present, to find wonder in the ordinary, to define wealth in moments rather than monoliths. It is the decision to repair rather than replace, to savor rather than scroll, to measure a life not in acquisitions but in aliveness. These are not abstract philosophies but lived truths, waiting beneath the noise like a melody beneath static. The matrix Watts described is not made of code but of conditioned thought, and its exit door is not a place but a perspective, one that sees through the illusion of lack and remembers, as he often said, that the real you is not the one who buys, but the one who wakes up. The human mind thinks in stories. This is how we've always made sense of the world. Consumerism understands this fundamental truth better than most spiritual traditions, which is why it doesn't simply sell products but entire mythologies. Alan Watts, in his penetrating wisdom, recognized that to free ourselves from this modern matrix, we must first become conscious of the archetypal narratives that shape our consumption. These are not mere marketing ploys but deep psychic patterns dressed in contemporary garb, ancient human vulnerabilities repackaged as modern desires. Consider the story of the Golden Fleece, that mythical prize which heroes crossed oceans to obtain. Today's version gleams from store shelves and online carts, the perfect skin cream promising eternal youth, the luxury car that whispers of status, the latest gadget that pledges to complete us. The structure remains identical, the notion that some external object contains transformative power. Watts would remind us that this is the oldest trick in the metaphysical book, the projection of our inner longing onto outer objects. The consumerist twist is particularly insidious because unlike ancient quests which demanded courage and growth, modern versions require only a credit card. We've replaced the hero's journey with the shopper's itinerary, mistaking acquisition for transformation. The true Golden Fleece, Watts might suggest, was never an object but the realization that we are already whole. Then there's the myth of Sisyphus, condemned to eternally push his boulder uphill. Our modern incarnation finds us endlessly scrolling, upgrading, and accumulating, each new purchase or achievement bringing temporary relief before the hunger returns. Consumerism has perfected this cycle of desire and dissatisfaction, turning it into an economic engine. Watts saw this as the fundamental suffering of the human condition when trapped in what Buddhists call samsara, the wheel of endless wanting. But where traditional myths present this as tragedy, consumerism repackages it as normalcy, even aspiration. The genius of Watts' perspective was in recognizing that the boulder doesn't need to reach the top. We need to stop believing the hill exists. Liberation comes not from pushing harder but from seeing through the illusion of the game entirely. Perhaps most powerful is the consumerist distortion of the alchemical narrative. where ancient alchemists sought to transform base metals into gold as an outer symbol of inner enlightenment. Today we perform this magic in reverse, turning our golden life energy into base consumption. Watts often spoke of how we've externalized the alchemical process, believing that transformation comes from what we acquire rather than how we perceive. The modern shopping mall becomes our alchemical laboratory, where we hope the right combination of purchases will somehow transmute our lives. The actual philosopher's stone, Watts would argue, was always consciousness itself, the ability to recognize that no product contains the power we project onto it. True alchemy occurs when we stop trying to buy transformation and start embodying it. These narratives reveal consumerism not as an economic system but as a mythological framework, one that co-opts our deepest psychic patterns for commercial ends. Watts' gift was in helping us see these stories for what they are. Not reality but constructs, not inevitabilities but choices. When we recognize the archetypes at play, we regain our power to rewrite them. The Matrix, after all, is made of stories, and stories can be changed. The most profound realizations remain abstract until they take root in our daily lives. Alan Watts' insights about consumerism are not meant to be admired from a distance but to be lived, to reshape how we move through the world, how we spend our time, and where we place our attention. The matrix of consumption thrives when philosophy stays theoretical, when awakening remains a concept rather than a practice. But the moment we begin to translate these truths into tangible choices, something shifts. The illusion loses its grip, and what once seemed inevitable reveals itself as optional. One of the most immediate ways to resist the pull of consumerism is to reclaim our relationship with time. The modern world operates on a paradox. It idolizes productivity while systematically eroding our capacity for presence. We fill our schedules with obligations, our screens with distractions, and our homes with objects that demand maintenance, all while wondering why life feels thin, why satisfaction remains elusive. Watts often spoke of time not as something to be managed but as something to be inhabited. This begins with small but radical acts: sitting without purpose, walking without destination, creating space in the day for pure being. These are not indulgences but acts of resistance, ways to step outside the machinery that turns every moment into a commodity. When we stop treating time as currency, we begin to notice how much of our spending is compulsive rather than chosen. Another practical frontier is the cultivation of what might be called conscious consumption. This does not mean austerity or self-denial, but a shift from impulse to awareness. Before any purchase, there is a potent question we can learn to ask: is this serving my life, or is my life serving it? The difference is everything. A sweater bought because it brings genuine warmth and joy is not the same as one bought to fill an emotional void or signal status. Watts was no ascetic. He enjoyed good food, fine art, and earthly pleasures, but he recognized the trap of accumulation for its own sake. The goal is not to own nothing, but to nothing own us. This discernment extends beyond objects to experiences, to the way we travel, to the media we consume. The matrix thrives on autopilot decisions. Awareness is the antidote. Perhaps the most subversive act in a consumerist culture is the rediscovery of intrinsic value, the ability to find meaning outside transactional frameworks. We live in a world that moneizes attention, that turns hobbies into side hustles, that quantifies worth in metrics and milestones. But Watts reminded us that the deepest joys, friendship, creativity, the quiet marvel of existence, cannot be measured or marketed. To garden without posting photos, to make music without seeking followers, to dine without documenting. These become revolutionary in an economy built on turning every human activity into data. The practice here is simple but profound. Do something each day that exists purely for its own sake, that resists the urge to be commodified. In these moments, we remember what it means to live rather than perform. The real-world implications of this shift extend far beyond personal fulfillment. Consumerism is not just an individual trap but a collective spell, one with ecological, social, and spiritual consequences. When we awaken from the trance of more, we begin to see how our choices ripple outward, how mindless consumption fuels environmental degradation, how the chase for status perpetuates inequality, how the commodification of attention erodes community. Watts' philosophy was never merely about personal enlightenment but about participating in what he called the great stream of life. Each conscious choice becomes a stone dropped in that stream, sending out waves that touch shores we may never see. This is not about perfection but orientation, a gradual turning toward a different way of being. Some days we'll forget and fall back into old patterns. Other days we'll catch ourselves mid-trance and choose differently. The matrix doesn't disappear overnight, but its hold weakens each time we pause, each time we question, each time we opt for depth over distraction. What's greatest gift may have been his ability to make enlightenment seem not like a distant peak but like the ground beneath our feet, something we've always been standing on. If only we'd stopped long enough to notice. At the heart of Alan Watts' message lies a quiet but seismic truth: we are not lacking. The entire apparatus of consumerism depends on our forgetting this, on our endless seeking for completion in external things. At the moment we remember, truly remember, that wholeness is our birthright, the spell begins to break. This is not a denial of life's material dimension, but a reclamation of sovereignty over it. Objects become tools to enjoy rather than idols to worship. Experiences become moments to live rather than trophies to collect. The call here is not to abandon the modern world but to engage with it differently, to walk through the marketplace wide awake, able to appreciate its wares without being enslaved by them. It's an invitation to measure wealth not in what we accumulate but in our capacity for presence, not in what we own but in how deeply we inhabit our lives. Watts often said that we suffer because we cling to the illusion that happiness lies somewhere else, in some other moment, in some future purchase. The revolutionary act is to realize it was here all along, in the texture of now, in the miracle of ordinary awareness. This is the true escape from the matrix, not a grand exit but a subtle shift in perception, a quiet homecoming to ourselves. The marketplace will continue its seductions, the screens will keep their glow, but we'll move through it all differently, not as hungry ghosts but as whole beings, not as consumers but as participants in the great, unfolding dance of existence. The choice, as always, is ours. The door, as Watts might say, was never locked, we just forgot it could open.